Back on the program, Steve Day, a former commander with JTF-2, Joint Task Force 2, the elite special forces, but now president and founder of Reticle Ventures, involved in the security consulting business. He's in Kingston, Ontario. It is always good to see you, especially today. We need some assessment, Steve. Welcome back.
Morning, Heather.
From Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky just now in a new videotaped address, he indicated, Steve, that he sees this moment, day 16, as a strategic turning point in the war. He didn't really expand upon that. Do you agree? And if so, how so?
Yeah, so what I would suggest, Heather, is maybe it's not this specific day, but we're certainly seeing a number of conditions being set in the Ukrainians' favor as the Russians clearly are trying to do this set piece encirclement now and closing in on Kiev. So maybe not just today, but over the next probably 96 hours, we're going to see exactly what happens around in and around Kiev.
96 hours, so imminently. That's certainly some of the things that we've been reading from U.S. officials as well. As I bring in the latest satellite images, Steve, I'm wondering if you could help us interpret those. This convoy, in some places, is only about 15 kilometers away now from the capital. But it kind of looks, well, it doesn't kind of, what the people who study this say, the convoy dispersed actually into the forest and then has regrouped. Prepping, Steve, is that what you think for this siege to come?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. They're starting to move into those tactical battle arrangements in the battle space. But I think what we should actually look at here is just take one step back and look at the Russians' complete inability to achieve any type of air superiority or air supremacy, the fact that they've got conscript forces. And so all of this to me is pointing to utterly inept command and control of the military operation.
But what does that spell, though? It has not gone well yet. We know how powerful, how much more there is to come from Russia potentially. So even though it hasn't started well, this is no paper tiger.
No, it's absolutely not a paper tiger, because we must not lose sight of the fact Russia has 1,500 fighter aircraft and a 3 million person military. So they have mass, and mass has its own quality. So they can bring mass to bear. But if you cannot coordinate and command and control that mass, effectively what you have is an armed gang. And I think that's what we're seeing. Targeting of hospitals, etc., is the command and control has broken down, and so they're having to reset and completely reset. And that's where I think we're at in this. We're seeing, quite frankly, the weaknesses in the larger Russian military.
So you mentioned conscripts. That is the situation. We're also hearing today that Russia is going to bring in approximately 16,000 volunteers, is how it describes it, from the Middle East, notably Syria, where they have seen a prolonged period of very violent urban warfare. What does that signal to you, Steve?
Well, again, it signals that they're having challenges on the ground, and that this encirclement and actually the battle for Kiev is actually going to be utterly barbaric. So again, we're having non-professional military mixed in with a quasi-professional military, i.e. the Russians. And they're going to go toe-to-toe with a resistance movement in Ukraine that is utterly impressive. So as long as we can continue to sustain that Ukrainian resistance, effectively we've got a stalemate on the battlefield.
I'm wondering, we've heard just a few moments ago from Ukraine's commander-in-chief. He's giving a bit of a press briefing in Lviv in the west, which is an area which is now seeing some attacks for the first time. But what he said, here's the number, 328 cruise missiles directed at cities, towns, and villages. You mentioned some of the targets just this morning, a kindergarten, a psychiatric hospital, of course, those terrible scenes of the maternity and children's hospital. These are kinds of atrocities that are very hard to look at. When you see the kinds of places that are being targeted, how do we interpret it? That they're just, that they are directly targeting those, or that they just happen to be not very good at getting the targets that they really have set on?
Well, I think it's a combination of a number of factors, and we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that there's propaganda on both sides of this conflict. So I think we need to look at it with a critical eye. I'm currently not privy to any specific intelligence, but there's no doubt in my mind that there is indiscriminate targeting of civilian areas. There's also accidental targeting of civilian areas. And it is only going to get worse over the next 96 hours as we start to move into that built-up area. So I'm not saying they specifically target it, but but I'm also not saying that they didn't.
So, on the matter of getting worse, there's a UN Security Council meeting today. Russia is accusing the United States of developing chemical weapons and biological weapons in Ukraine. And of course, U.S. denies that and is saying it's a potential false flag, that Russia often signals in its accusations exactly what it is doing. How likely do you think it is that what we witnessed in Syria, we will again witness in Ukraine?
Well, again, I would not be surprised to see the Russian military use chemical, biological, or even tactical nuclear weapons. It is part of their doctrine. And I think, as we've seen with Vladimir Putin, he is not actually acting like a rational actor right now. We've seen what I would, again, characterize a non-professional Russian military that is into a dogfight right here. And I would not be surprised at all that, like you said, they're building the narrative, and that we could see the deployment of those utterly weapons of mass destruction that should not be employed in the 21st century.
Well,
it'll be a crime against humanity without a doubt.
It's just chilling to contemplate. There are reports, again, just this morning, of cluster munitions, of the launchers for those thermobaric weapons that we've talked about before. If Russia does that, how should the world respond?
Well, I would hope the world would continue to isolate Russia. I would like to see the world unite even more and stand up to the little bit of the bully that we haven't done militarily yet. I'm not suggesting we want to trigger World War III, but I think what we're seeing is that the Russian military is a bit more of a paper tiger than we may have initially thought. Again, command and control is utterly inept at this point in time. You've got conscript soldiers with little to no morale. You've got equipment breakdowns. You see the military unable to affect the most basic of military ground maneuver. So the military, the vaunted Russian military, may not be as invincible as we've believed for a number of decades.